Here, carry this. What? Ow! Hello everyone and welcome back to the Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton and I'm with the wonderful Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. And today we're talking about kids, or adults with kids, or adults behaving like kids because they have kids.
Adults with young kids.
Or kids making adults feel like a kid, or having tantrums, or all of the above. What it's like to have young kids and the pressure it brings on the relationship. So
Yeah, it's the season of parenting young ones. Literally, this was inspired because over the last week or so, I lost count of how many posts I saw in mums groups, even in my own Facebook feed, of people expressing, I don't know if it's an exhaustion, an overwhelm, a complete level of tapped outness. I know that's not a real word,
but we'll run with it.
The general feeling is like kids, when you're in the season of parenting kids, let's say below the age of 6 or 7, or even below school age, that is the season where parents seem to struggle the most. And it's the most likely time for couples to reach a point of, I don't think I can continue in the relationship. I need out. I need space. I don't want to do this anymore. It's the time where they feel unsupported, unheard, unseen. It's a time where all of our most vulnerable stuff comes to the surface. And my theory on that is because we are biologically and physiologically so disadvantaged in the season of young kids because of so many reasons. One, sleep deprivation.
Yep.
Sleep deprivation is literally used as a form of torture. And there's sleep deprivation research, so many sleep deprivation studies that show that all of your cognitive functions decline, your executive function absolutely tanks, your emotional regulation absolutely tanks, your appetite changes, your sex drive changes. There's all these massive shifts in our bodies and in the way that we relate with and to others in the world just off the back of sleep deprivation. And the season of young kids, when they might be waking a lot through the night, or wetting the bed, or they might be sick, or it doesn't take much. So that's the first thing. And then the sensory overload, of young children that just, they're chaotic and they're loud and they're unpredictable, and they will go from laughing to screaming to crying to hugging to wanting to be on you 24/7. It's a lot. Auditory stimulus, it's a lot. And so from a sensory overload perspective, young children just absolutely are so demanding. And then you got financial pressures because you're young. So usually your earning potential isn't quite where it could be yet, career-wise. And your living expenses are pretty high. That's when you might be going into your first home, or trying to grapple a rental market or whatever it might be. There's just, oh my gosh, I felt like we had survived a war when my youngest went to school. And my marriage ended when my kids were 2 and 5. So I was one of those, what would you call it, statistics?
Well, a statistic, yeah. I mean, it happens. It can happen at any age. But I think we need to probably change the thumbnail to thinking about having kids, open for contraception, because you've just given 4 minutes of the amazing highlight of what it's like to have kids if you haven't had them yet. But it's all very true. The pressures it brings on is immense. The joy it also brings, also immense. But I think what we're going to be talking about here is going to be the best way to sum up everything you spoke about. It's an attack on our capacity. So when we have everyday life, it requires capacity because it's not just smooth sailing. We might feel times or have moments of it, but it's generally not. And part of your life is going to be your relationship. Now, how strong is the relationship? Now, if a lot of your capacity is put into, let's just say, covering some cracks, holding it together,
Yeah.
pleasing the other one, not necessarily being authentic, but tolerating other behaviours, faking what you need to prevent an argument, all of these things, being compassionate, being all of this, right? If your relationship already takes a large amount of capacity just to keep the status quo, you add kids in and they demolish your capacity. Absolutely demolish it. Not because they come to do that. It's simply that without your input, they simply won't survive. That's it. So you're not just looking
As
after
mammals,
yourself.
they're dependent on us as their caregivers for their survival, the longest out of any other mammal on the planet.
Thank you, big brain. So I think what kids actually do is they highlight the inadequacies of the relationship, or they help you pinpoint what energy are you pouring into the relationship that's not necessarily fully authentic. Now, I'm not saying that relationships don't take
and
time.
they show you where you need to heal.
Yeah. Because no relationship's going to be perfect. But if you are putting an exorbitant amount of effort, consciously, subconsciously, in trying to manage your emotions as opposed to healing through it, then once you take away capacity, you're not able to do that anymore. And so the children themselves don't create the separation. They just enlarge or basically take the capacity away for you to keep the void between the two of you at a manageable level if it's being maintained. Because if you don't put the effort into trying to fill that void, more than likely in an unhealthy way, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you're holding it together, a kid comes in and now you're focusing over there, well, the void just gets too big. They don't create it, they just expand it. And so a bit like yourself, I separated from my parents' mother when our youngest was a bit before 2, and my daughter was 4.5, 5. But it wasn't because of the children. It was simply because, to be honest, we never bounced back after having the second child. We knew what to expect from the first child, but there was sort of like this sort of period of time where it was our first child, sleep deprivation, all of that. Relationship takes a hit, but it kind of bounces back a bit. Once you start to get a bit of a routine, there's daycare involved or whatever it is that you need to maintain. And so coming into child number 2, we had a bit of an idea, but we simply never bounced back. And normally the bouncing back happens when the child gets to sleep through at night, because you're dead on. Sleep deprivation. And we had different strategies in place. I'll do shifts, she'll do shifts, and all of those things to try and share the load. But with the second one, even when he started sleeping through, our relationship never turned back on. And so it was a challenge. But it wasn't because of the kids. And this is the thing. You could replace children with a job or a hobby or an obsession or something else, something that really exhausts your capacity. If you take your focus away from the relationship completely or to a large event, it basically allows the relationship at its core to run its course. So if it's positive, it'll improve. If it's flat, it's flat. If it's on a decline, it's on a decline. It's fascinating.
That's massive. We have a lag, Dave, and so I'm gonna wait until you are fully out before I speak, because otherwise it constantly sounds like I'm speaking over the top of you anytime I talk when I hear a gap.
Gotcha. Turn off the echo cancellation. I think that's what it is. Technical difficulties, people.
I can't turn it off while we're recording. Anyway, we'll try that for the next one. Anyway, so I think that that's a really good point. And also, I feel like it's not fair to assume it's because of the kids. And I agree with you. It's not because of the kids. We are, I really hope that we don't need to say this bit, but to state the obvious, we're not saying we don't love our kids. We're not saying we wish we didn't have the kids. We're not blaming our kids for our relationships ending. All of those things, I would not change having my kids for anything ever. Like, hopefully that's obvious. But I also don't think it's fair to say that other things are an equivalent to the pressures of childhood, like a job or a hobby or anything else, because a job is not dependent on us for its survival. Neither is a hobby. Neither is the world will still keep turning for those things, even if we don't show up or even if we're not giving ourselves to it. And I think that is something that I find really humbling when, when I say humbling, it's taught me to really tune into my spirit when people who don't have children, they haven't lived it. There is no possible way that they could understand what it's like, what is required of you when you go through especially for a woman who has gone through the physical trauma of birth, which even if you have a nice birth, it's extremely physically invasive for your body. There's a recovery period, a physical healing period. But in that same physical healing period, you have a child who needs to feed from you literally around the clock. So you don't even get the rest to recover. And it's been amazing. I was the youngest out of my whole group of friends to have kids. So I didn't really have friends around me who had gone through it or who experienced it. And even though my son is now 11, my friends that I was studying with are kind of in the season of starting their families now. And it's so beautiful to watch them be initiated into parenthood and have conversations with them about like, wow, I so underestimated how hardcore this is and how demanding it is. Because we can work a 60, 70, 80 hour job and still get to sleep through the night, still get to, turn off, not be needed. It's just not, it's so not the same thing.
It's not, but I will say from a male perspective that I know of guys who would listen to that and go, well, you probably don't know the pressures of running your own small business where you are the main breadwinner. And their identity is wrapped up in this business. So that's
their child.
They live, breathe, exist because of the business or what the business brings them, whether it's, some sort of, I suppose, position, the ability to buy nice toys, to travel, to, have a say in something, to be an industry expert or something like that. And so when it comes to bedtime, the business may not be physically crying. Doesn't stop them from waking up going, oh crap, I need to do this, or I can't sleep, or insomnia kicks in. But this is coming from a male perspective that actually hasn't carried life, like grow a person in their womb, go through the whole experience. And I guess that's just a different perspective, right?
I think that's really valuable. But it also sounds like you were very hands-on with your kids. When you were saying before about doing the shift work and not shift work, but the night shifts and all that sort of stuff.
I would
were you
say,
quite hands-on in?
Yeah, as hands-on as I could be for someone who still worked 45 hours. Like, I wasn't a maniac at work. But I still had to travel a lot. And so the kid's mum still had to carry all of those things when I was at work. So yes, for the first couple of weeks, took it off, and I'd dive into anything. Change nappies, do all that, play with them. I would say I'm probably 1,000 times more involved in my kid's life now than I was back then. And that's because...
Is that because they're older and you can relate to them more at this age, or
No, it's me.
because you're more... Yeah.
All me. The ability to connect and be vulnerable and to really enjoy, because the way my life's structured now, small business owner, but everything is, I dictate the hours and all of that, whether money comes in or not. Well, it depends on what day it is. But I'm allowed to focus on them because I've gone through the part of I have to work to provide for my kids. My scorecard back then was how much money came in the door. My scorecard now is how I show up every day for them, whether that be providing for them physically, financially, spiritually, emotionally. Mm-hmm. These are all part of it, where before I was just focused on financially. And I'd do some stuff with them. I'd go for runs with them. I'd fix a fence with, my son on my back, or, things like that. I was rather connected to the level I was able to back then, but much deeper now. But when we come back to this episode, it's about how do the parents survive in the relationship. And it's about, for me, it's about the building blocks before that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the building blocks before then, but I also think it's worth pointing out that, like, in that relationship, when there is bickering, when there's arguments, when there's that constant feeling of not being seen, not being heard, not important, when you've got like a double whammy, because on the one side, one person is so tapped out that they don't have capacity, but also because they're so tapped out, it's most essential in that time when they're so tapped out that they need to be seen, heard, and understood. So not only is their need the highest, but their capacity to meet the other's need is lowest. And so you've got two highly needy people who need to be seen, who need to be heard, who need to be understood. And 9 times out of 10, what I observe is it's not that someone needs the other person to come and fix their problems and completely change. They simply need for the other person to go, that must be really hard. I've got you. This season's really shit, isn't it? Like, this is hard. How can we support each other? How can we be there for each other? And just in that, the other person coming and being with them in their hard time brings them down. It brings the need to be seen, heard, and understood down, and increases their capacity just because they're not in it alone. And that's on both sides. Like, the other thing that's really fascinating in this, especially for first children, is that even a male needs to be seen, heard, and understood. They need that. But then there's a baby who, now again, don't hear what I'm not saying, people. I'm not saying that it's not hard for the man. I'm not saying that the baby's at fault. I'm saying the fact is that, especially if a woman is breastfeeding, that child is attached to its mother around the clock. Which means that when the mother's attention is on this little infant, it's not on her partner. And if the mother's attention is not on her partner, guess what he's not feeling? Seen, heard, and understood. He doesn't feel valued. He's not getting any of your love and attention. And now we can judge that. We can look at it and go, oh, that's ridiculous. He's a grown man. He shouldn't need your attention. And you're not giving the baby attention. You're not neglecting him. The baby needs to be fed. Well, yes, all of that's true. We're not arguing on any of that. All of that's true. But if people just understood that during these times, your needs to be seen, heard, and understood are at an all-time high, because it's uncertain, it's new, it's unpredictable, it's scary, as well as your capacity to meet the needs being at an all-time low, because biologically and physiologically, with all of those factors we mentioned at the start, you're already at a huge disadvantage. It's the gap between the needs that we have and the capacity to meet those needs that fractures relationships and makes that constant bickering or feeling super short with each other or feeling super disconnected or not feeling supported, feeling like you're alone in the relationship. That's what is at the root of that. And I think on the flip side of that, you mentioned the foundations are so important. I talk about this thing, I call it the playbook. And when I'm working with couples, I do this thing where we'll do what I call an aligned relationship session, where what we do is we recognize that the partner A comes in with their playbook for life. Partner B comes in with their playbook for life that was, contributed to by their parents, by society, by their values, by how they were raised, their ideas on discipline, on how we divide up chores in the house. But when you start a family and now you can only take one value forward for each thing and pass that on to the child, someone's playbook has to be put to the side, or an aspect of someone's playbook has to be put to the side. And what I find can be so helpful in relationships is about coming together with the intention of creating the healthiest home environment and healthiest developmental environment for the child, and going, let's put both of our playbooks to the side and let's create our own. Let's create our own playbook where we go through every aspect of the relationship and go, what do we want this to look, feel, and sound like? And then who do we need to be in order to create that? Then you've got two individuals who are equally responsible for their own contribution to that playbook. And that to me is the solid foundation for a healthy relationship, because that playbook is the very thing that says, if I am feeling super tapped out, these are the words I need to hear from you. And you say those words and it's like magic. I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel supported. If this is happening with the child and you observe me at this point where you're noticing in my voice, I'm starting to feel frustrated, then I need you to recognize and see me at that level of frustration, and I need you to come and tap me out. Because if you stand there and watch and I go from here to here to here to here to here to here, what's the outcome of that? I'm completely dysregulated.
Yeah, 100%. But that's what a healed relationship looks like. And to be honest, if you
what the plan to heal a relationship looks like.
Well, yeah, but to be able to get to that point, you have to have so much groundwork. To allow that awareness in, even before you can practice it, it takes a lot, because what you have to overcome is, why is it up to me? It's that self-accountability, because you're sort of like, and again, let's just talk about from a male side, right? In the relationship, I hear it a lot. The mother has a baby and there's two adults and a baby. Well, in a relationship, there's two adults, a baby there's two babies and an adult. That's what you generally hear. The mother has to mother not only the baby, but the father of the baby as well. Because from a male's point of view, yeah, you kind of feel pushed to the back. Unless you're a very hands-on dad, there's that sort of sense of what connection do I have with my wife, partner, whatever, it diminishes because the focus is on the child. Now, if you can't have your needs met, or if you can't express your needs, and again, this is all about kind of what is your relationship at the time the baby's born. Because healing your relationship and raising an infant child would be a monumental task on their own, but incredibly complex together. It would be, wow. Drop in the comments if you've gone through both at the same time. But if you were to do them individually, fantastic. But typically what happens, and what this is really about, this particular podcast, is you've come into it, you've got kids, and things are turning to caca. And so we're sort of looking at how do you turn that around? And so it's a big process, because all of the things that are driving the limiting beliefs, all of the projections that are coming up through trauma, they need to be healed regardless. It just so happens that previously you've gone from something that somewhat works at some level and is no longer working. And you're trying to find the cause of why it's not working. And how often do we look to the other side as the problem? I wouldn't be this way if that happened. Or in my case, I haven't changed, and I didn't. But now the expectations have gone up. So, well, hang on, what do I need to do? And why is it all being put on me to have to change? As opposed to a healed version of me would have looked at that and gone, well, it's not that I should just be acting the same way. Yes, everything's changed. And so the way we approach this situation jointly as a team needs to change. And this is my contribution. But my scorecard...
Like adaptability is a really big part of that. So
it's
the growth
being aware.
mindset is all around being adaptable and being flexible and responsive, instead of being fixed and rigid and reactive.
Well, how about this? Just replace all of that with being curious. Right?
100%.
And it's just sort of, don't worry about any of that stuff and just focus on what if my view of the fact that it's not fair because all of these things I did before was tolerated, no longer isn't. That person's changed. That person needs to deal with it. You come back and be curious and go, you know what? Everything's changed. Why is it that I'm so set in my ways? What is holding me to that path? What's holding me to that scorecard? Because that's going to be really, really important.
I think that something else that's coming to my mind is that when we are in relationship, it's recognizing that the other person is not your relationship. A relationship is an entity that is birthed through how two individuals relate with and to each other. Now, if there are relationship problems, the entity that is the relationship that you and another person have co-created, if you want to change the entity that the two of you are co-creating, the two of you need to change. And it can't just be one person. So I have this conversation quite a lot, and it's really fascinating to me that for the first time ever, I wrote a relationship program 4 years ago, and I have still to this day have never launched or released it. And just recently, I've had an influx of couples wanting to come through my Rise and Thrive program. Now, the really cool thing about that is we look at, as I said before, that playbook, that alignment session. What is the relationship entity What do you want it to look like? And I think it's about recognizing it's so easy to have a happier relationship when you are both in a good place, when you're both, using the advantage of being able to have time and space, being able to rest well, being able to have some autonomy, being able to to make some choices and all that sort of stuff, right? Like, it's so easy for me to be the best version of myself when there's no challenge. And if it's easy for me to be a better version of me, and it's easier for my partner to be a better version of him because we're not experiencing any conflict or challenge, we can be deceived into thinking that we have a healthy relationship. But then what happens is when something occurs, when a challenge occurs where I am pressured and I can't show up as the best version of me, and they don't know how to handle or how to love that version of me, and they're not being the best version of them, and I don't know how to love and show up as them not being that best version of them, well, now all hell breaks loose. Now you go, okay, well, it's not, we had a great relationship before, and now our relationship, well, no. You guys were better versions of yourselves because the environment biologically and physiologically allowed you and supported you to be that better version of you, which meant that the relationship, the entity, the product of a better version of you and a better version of you was healthier. Now, because of all of the factors that we already spoke about earlier on, that means that we're showing up at a lower version of ourselves in the midst of a storm, in the midst of that chaos of life. Now, when I show up down here and my partner shows up down here, what do you think we co-create as the entity that is our relationship? It's toxic. It's bickering. It's unsupportive. It's horrible. It's a relationship that we don't want to stay in. And what I say to people is this relationship down here, this entity that is my relationship down here, where not the best version of me and not the best version of them is showing up, has to die. Now, when I say that relationship has to end, I don't necessarily mean to say they have to break up and separate, but what I do mean is that in order to have a relationship that's up here, you guys collectively have to decide to end and be done with the relationship that's down here, which means none of you get to show up as this version of you anymore. If you want to do relationship up here, you both need to become the version of you, even in the storm, required to have that entity and have that relationship that's up here. And I think that is, for me, that was such a big, revelation, because the reality is there's times when I'm not the best version of me. So my husband is learning how to love me, how to hold me, how to support me in that time. And, one of the funniest things was when, so my husband has cystic fibrosis, and when he is unwell, historically, I used to try and nurse him, and I would love on him and take care of him. But I would feel resentment if I was ever unwell that he would not know what to do. He just had no idea what to do because I was always at this level. And then when I'm down here, he didn't know what to do. And I injured my back yesterday. And last night I was a bit miserable, and he came into the kitchen and he just hugged me and loved on me and was like, "Oh, how can I support you? What do you need from me right now?" All this stuff. And I actually laughed. I was like, did you just Google that? Did you just Google what to say? And because it was so awesome.
Nice.
There's a previous version of him who would just probably have not even seen it, to be honest. And I would have felt rejected and not important and not loved. But it wasn't malicious. It's just that it wasn't in his radar. And it was such a different response from him. And that to me is about, okay, so in that moment, physically, because I was injured and in pain, I was not at the level that I normally am. And so how did he respond and love me at the level I was at to help bring me back to the level that I can be. And I think that's the point of co-regulation, right? So if you have this healthy relationship entity that exists up here and one person in the relationship dips to down here, co-regulation is about this person with the higher frequency, this person with the higher consciousness, being able to hold a level of safety and gentle love and patience to be able to elevate the other person. Because the second I jump down here and start going at them and using their being down here as the thing that I say, well, you provoked me. This is your fault that I reacted like that, because if you hadn't have done that, then I wouldn't have had to come down here. That is really narcissistic, gaslighty behavior, because no one else is responsible for our choices and behaviors, consciously or unconsciously, except us. And this is something that I see quite a lot. And I mean, that used to be my experience. So I lived that. So I don't know, I'm a visual person. Hopefully the arm thing kind of made sense of what's happening in my head. But I'm a big fan of the death, burial, and resurrection of relationships. And I feel like any relationship can turn around with two willing participants to do the work to co-create something healthier.
And that's going to be the biggest point. Relationships require two people. Add a child into it, you've now got three people. And so two by choice, one birthed into it.
Yeah.
Right? If, without going to high spiritual thoughts, yes, there could be a choice from the kid, but we'll bring it back down a bit. But ultimately, the growth, when that child is born, that is the snapshot of the relationship that's going to take you forward. Now, if you spent a lot of time healing the relationship, then you're probably not healing yourself. So you need to heal yourself before you heal the relationship. And if both people take that mantra into it, it will survive. If you spend too much time, both of you, healing the relationship, as soon as that capacity is taken away and focused on the child where it needs to be, then the relationship will die. And if you haven't got the two of you on board, then you need to then choose and decide what is for you. Now, that's going to be a uniquely you choice. But there's a lot to raise a child, either together or singly, if that's a word. We seem to be making those up. But it's a big thing. So give yourself a lot of compassion. Give your significant other a lot of compassion. Give your child a lot of compassion. But at the core of it, if you are struggling and you really need help and you just don't know what to do, the only thing I can suggest as a surefire way to move the needle a little bit is for you and your partner to remain curious that if what's happening is not the actual truth of the matter, it's not their fault, it's not this, it's not that, what else could it be? And by simply staying in that curious mindset, you will start to see something else. And that,
I love that.
You may not want to see it, right? Some people just don't want to see it. But if you do want to see it, that's how you do it. Now, one thing that we'll sort of touch on before we wrap this up is that's just highlighting the relationship at the time the child was born. Add the fact that as we move on in life, and especially in this season of humanity, people are waking up. People are not necessarily accepting the status quo as before. So chances are, imagine if your partner doesn't change, but you changed. But you can't figure out why. There's a calling for you to go in a different direction. That can happen as well. So, is there anything else you want to add before we...
Recently.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I had this conversation recently, and it relates to an episode that we recorded. Oh my gosh. I feel like it was a long time ago, like maybe episode 15, 16, somewhere around there.
Guys, like 55 episodes ago. Yeah.
It was along the lines of when you grow, but the people around you aren't.
It's their
And I think
choice.
that's one of the scariest, it's one of the scariest things in relationships is about recognizing that if you want, what do you want more? Do you want the person? In which case, if you're choosing the person, you have to choose the dysfunction that comes with the person. Or do you want the healthy relationship?
Mm.
And when I look at it that in that way, it's such a simple question for me with a very simple answer. Because when I choose the person, including the dysfunction that comes with it, it might mean that I cannot simultaneously choose healthy relationship. Or if I choose healthy relationship and I'm doing the work and growing and healing to have that healthy relationship, it might mean that I cannot have healthy relationship and simultaneously have the person and their dysfunction. And that is the hardest thing to come to terms with, because if I stay down here, it also means I don't have healthy relationship with me. If I'm choosing to continue to allow myself to experience abuse or neglect or whatever it might be, unhealthy love, then I'm not choosing healthy relationship with me, with myself. So I find that to be one of the hardest turning points for people, and it's a conversation I have surprisingly often with people. And it's not that I am not advocating for separation. What I'm advocating for is for them to be seeing with crystal clarity where they're making choices in their lives. And it's not about judgment. I don't care what dysfunction is going on. I'm not judging the person. I'm not, whatever's been has been. But it's about going, are they willing to grow with you to co-create that relationship? And as you mentioned, the hardest season to do that is the season of having young kids. But also I find that is having young kids and wanting to heal and grow for many couples is the very leverage it takes to do the work.
Absolutely the catalyst,
So,
because the divide opens up so big that we can't ignore it anymore. If you can keep on patching over it quicker than the gap creates, then you don't need, everything's fine. But when you let it get to a big gaping hole, then you're forced to do something. Now, as you were saying it previously about sort of dysfunction and what's for you or maybe what's not, a quote came into my head, whether it's mine or someone else's that I've heard. If you're aware of better, then you're being called to better. And so it's just a matter of, and again, this is not sort of going, you need to be the perfect version and you're looking for the perfect version. You have completely, horrendous expectations that, you'll never achieve it. No, it's about sort of going with that person through all of their amazing traits and all of their traits that need healing. There's no question whether you want to be with them or not. There's simply no question. It doesn't mean it's not going to be easy all the time. Doesn't mean it's always going to be difficult. But you have no question. This is my person. Through this, through that, or through something else.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And also I would say that even if the other person isn't at the point of moving forward with you, again, not an advocate for separating when you're both here. What I am an advocate for is healthy relationship. So even if that other person is not willing at that time, is not willing to co-create a healthy relationship with you, you have a responsibility to go on that journey yourself. And when you go on that journey yourself and you start to heal and your consciousness starts to rise and you become more empowered and your standards for what a healthy relationship for yourself and others and especially your children looks like, they will either join you, even if it's 6 months down the track, it doesn't matter. But while you're on your journey to having healthy relationship with yourself and others, and you can sustain it, not be dragged back down here, only then can you make a choice and make a judgment call as to whether or not that person is willing to join you on the journey with you. And I say that is so powerful for children, because when two people are here, you are teaching your children how to have an unhealthy relationship with themselves, basically how to abuse themselves, and you're teaching your children how to have an unhealthy romantic relationship. When you're
kicking the healing can down a generation. Either you be the change at your level, or you kick the can down to the kids' level to say, now it's up to you to do it. But you can sit back and go, but you know what, I can't because I'm doing this for whatever reason, right? But
exactly. It's like the person having the relationship here who can sit here all day and say, I want my kids to have self-esteem and self-love and self-belief, and I want my kids to have a healthy relationship with themselves and good mental health, and I want them to have a great healthy marriage one day. But they've never seen it. Because healthy relationship with self, all those healthy self stuff, self-belief, self-confidence, self-esteem, that happens when we raise the bar and have a healthy relationship with ourselves. But they will have never seen that unless one of us actually, bites the bullet and does the work. Regardless of whether the relationship is sustained and they, join you and come and go on that journey together, and then the children get to see a healthy romantic relationship, or at the bare minimum, you demonstrate to your children healthy relationship with self. That sets them up. It's like a psychological bulletproof vest for the development, the healthy development of your child's sense of self and relationship with self that they will take into their adult lives. It is so powerful, and what a place to end.
It is. And just on one last note before we wrap it up, I believe people that don't do it are doing it because they're scared of what the process of going from here to here will have on the effect of the child, as opposed to what effect it will happen at the end. So it's pretty brutal, but this has been a big episode, and hope you got some value from it. Drop some comments, tickle the like button, click the subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. A lot of you guys aren't subscribers, but happy you've come across it. But if you like what you've heard or seen, then let us know, and we'll catch you on the next week's episode.
If you need help to go on that healing journey, reach out. You know where to find me.
Yeah. See you later.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.